The government climbs down over taking more unaccompanied child refugees. David Cameron bows to pressure to accept another 3,000 youngsters already in Europe.
The principle we should try to cling to is that we shouldn't do anything that encourages people to make the perilous journey.
Also tonight, top trumps the controversial billionaires one step closer to the White House.
Mixed messages on Ecigs. They may be safer than tobacco, but new laws have banned advertising them. And
everyone on their feet upstairs in the stands. Ida Keeling at 100 years old.
She's a record breaker, the 100-year-old athlete, proving age is no barrier.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Mark Austin.
Good evening. David Cameron backed down in the face of growing backbench rebellion today and said Britain will take in more child refugees. Amid mounting pressure, the Prime Minister has committed to accepting unaccompanied children who are already in Greece, Italy and France.
He says the exact number will depend on discussions with local councils, and Mr Cameron also insisted he wouldn't do anything that could encourage more migrants to attempt the perilous crossing to Europe. From Westminster, here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp.
This was never about child refugees in Syria, nor those in the camps to which they still flee. It was an argument about those children without parents in Europe and whether the UK had a responsibility to help.
Prime Minister!
At first, it was a no, but today, that changed.
We are going to do more for children who are already registered in Europe before the EU-Turkey deal, but the principle we should try to cling to is that we shouldn't do anything that encourages people to make the perilous journey. That's been the cornerstone of our policy, and it should remain the case.
So what did all that mean? Number 10 says the government will now help refugees under 18 who've already reached Greece, Italy or France. But they must have been registered in those countries before the EU's migration deal with Turkey on the 20th of March. Downing Street won't say how many will be resettled here, but children at risk of trafficking or exploitation will be prioritised. David Cameron had effectively been cornered by Lord Dubs, a Labour peer with experience of fleeing his homeland.
Our arrivals by boat included some little Polish refugees.
Alf Dubs came to the UK from Czechoslovakia on the Kinders transport scheme in the late 1930s. It helped 10,000 mostly Jewish children at risk from the Nazis. And Lord Dubs had the support of a growing number of Tory MPs.
We were fleeing the Holocaust, we were fleeing gas chambers. That's not true of the children in Europe, but they are still vulnerable, they are still in danger, and we should do something for them. That's the bottom line.
But these children are in countries who are member states of the European Union. There are plenty of people who would argue, and do still argue, that they have a responsibility to look after these children.
I argue it's a shared responsibility. Britain should play its part and other countries should play theirs.
David Cameron has already committed to resettle 20,000 people from camps in the Middle East and 3,000 children there without parents. But today's climb down on those children in Europe comes without a number.
It leaves it open to accept how many children we think is in their best interest and local authorities can support. And our sense of working with the British public and working on the continent is that could mean thousands.
He's doing it even though he didn't want to. That's the political reality of a slim majority in the Commons. Chris Shipp, ITV News, Westminster.
Well, some of the vulnerable children who could be helped by today's climb down live in the sprawling migrant camp in Calais, known as the Jungle. Many are at risk of trafficking and live in awful conditions. Our social affairs editor, Penny Marshall, has been to the camp and spoke to youngsters desperate to come to the UK.
Only the toughest make it here, and only the toughest survive. The Jungle camp in Calais is not a place for unaccompanied children, but 150 are here, and all of them want to be in England. Mohammed and Ibrahim, aged 16 and 17, are from Syria and have family in the UK. They didn't want to be identified. Today's announcement should help them.
Manchester.
Mohammed hopes he'll be able to join his brother in Manchester soon. Those working with the children want the words to be followed by action.
This sort of announcement needs to be followed by detailed planning and consultation with operations like ourselves on the ground to ensure that it's best able to cope with the scale of the problem and the speed at which it needs to be resolved.
The Lost Boys of Calais, as they are known, are a tiny fraction of the tens of thousands of unaccompanied minors across Europe. They're vulnerable to traffickers and exploitation, and most live in squalor. 15-year-old Hasib from Afghanistan may not be helped by today's climb down. He says he set out with his family but became separated from them all on the journey.
All the way in these 4 months I'm thinking about my family. Where are they? Where's my family?
This is your home? Zirat is only 12 and made it all the way here alone from Afghanistan after his school was bombed. He told me he's learned to survive remaining outside all official channels, so he won't be affected by today's promises.
And you alone? Where's your family?
Afghanistan.
Afghanistan?
Yes.
So you're nobody here?
No.
And are you frightened? Scared?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is it danger?
Yeah, danger.
Helping children like Zerat without encouraging many more to take risks and come won't be easy. Today's announcement may solve a UK political problem, but it's unlikely to do much to help the wider global crisis or the children caught up in it. Penny Marshall, ITV News, Calais.
Well, let's go back to our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Shipp in Westminster. Chris, do you think the government's done enough to see off criticism about its policy on unaccompanied children?
Well, Mary, we've said it before, but what a difference a week makes in politics. In Prime Minister's questions last Wednesday, David Cameron was still articulating the old policy, which was they wouldn't take any of these unaccompanied children from Europe for fear of encouraging more of them to make that perilous crossing across the Mediterranean into the EU. But I think effectively with this compromise now, David Cameron has bought off the rebellion, and it was simply a case of politics trumping policy. I think what really does happen now is the focus shifts to local authorities who have to implement this climb down or compromise, however you want to call it. Now, I spoke to Kent County Council today. They say they've got 876 children under 18 currently in their care at a cost of £40,000 to £50,000 per child per year. And I think whilst we are focusing on the numbers, it could be up to 3,000. I think local authorities will now be looking to the government to help them financially with this new policy.
Chris Shipp in Westminster, thank you.
Donald Trump is now effectively just one step away from the White House after a crushing victory in the latest contest in Indiana. The billionaire's main Republican rival, Ted Cruz, conceded defeat, leaving the way clear for Trump to get the party's nomination. But he's deeply divided the Republicans, with some burning their voting forms in disgust. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore reports on Trump's remarkable progress.
With his wife leading the way, the billionaire emerged to savour this moment. A shock to the political system not seen for a generation. After an outrageously unorthodox campaign, Donald Trump is taking the Republican Party into unknown and completely unpredictable terrain.
This country, which is very, very divided in so many different ways, is going to become one beautiful, loving country. And we're going to love each other, we're going to cherish each other, we're going to take care of each other.
The most polarising candidate in the race not only called for love and unity, but then pivoted again, expressing admiration for the fierce rival he has been mocking as lying Ted.
Just so you understand, Ted Cruz, I don't know if he likes me or if he doesn't like me, but he is one hell of a competitor. He is a tough, smart guy.
A great American family.
The Texas senator was ultimately crushed by the Trump juggernaut. The overnight result forcing him and his tearful supporters to accept the inevitable.
Together, we left it all on the field in Indiana. We gave it everything we've got. But the voters chose another path.
Some Republicans posted videos and photos on social media showing them burning their voting cards, vowing never to support Trump. Others telling us they had already rehearsed what they would tell their grandchildren.
Grandpa, the thing is off the rails. How did you vote in 2016? I'd say I didn't vote for either one of these people. Pretty sad day.
And I can't believe America's taking him seriously and
just very disappointed.
This is the first time in my life that I can't vote for a presidential candidate. If it's Donald Trump, I'm not going to vote.
Yet, as we have witnessed all over this country, Trump generates fierce loyalty too, especially among Americans who harbour deep-seated and widely ignored economic, political and even cultural grievances. When he announced his candidacy, he was treated as a punchline. Now the establishment is left reeling, wondering and even fearing if he can go all the way.
But Robert, winning the Republican nomination's one thing, getting to the White House quite another. How difficult is the road ahead now for Donald Trump?
Well, Mark, it would seem implausible he could make it. In the last 11 months, he's grossly offended key voting groups, Hispanics most obviously, but also women, African Americans, social conservatives, the disabled. But the story of the day is underestimate Donald Trump at your peril. You can just about glimpse a route, an unusual route to victory. It would go through the Rust Belt, exploit economic frustration there, require union members to embrace a populist Republican. And another factor he has in his favour is that he's going to face Hillary Clinton. Yes, she is resilient and formidable, but she also has very high negative ratings. So essentially, Mark, you could be looking at a multi-billion-dollar battle between two pretty unpopular candidates.
Interesting few months ahead. Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Here, a mother who murdered her 18-month-old foster daughter has been jailed for life. Candice Downer will spend a minimum of 18 years behind bars for killing the toddler called Keegan, 8 months after she became the girl's legal guardian.
And police in Devon are digging up a garden at the former home of a paedophile couple who were friends of serial killers Fred and Rose West. Excavation work began at the property this morning, apparently after a tip-off.
Now, Europe's highest court has upheld tough new rules that ban the advertising of e-cigarettes. There will also be stringent limits on their strength and how much nicotine fluid they can hold. It comes just a week after medical experts said so-called vaping helped people quit smoking and was much less harmful than tobacco. Our consumer editor Chris Choi reports on the crackdown.
We have an exceptional range of electronic cigarettes. E-cig adverts like this are to be banned, as these devices, rocketing in popularity, face their first brush with significant regulation, something that for some is already long overdue.
The sort of advertising that we've seen on TV for e-cigarettes, some of it is really worrying because it's just the same way that cigarettes used to be advertised, to glamorise their use and encourage young people to take up their use.
An advertising ban covering most TV, radio and print will start on May the 20th. There'll also be new warnings saying highly addictive on e-cig packaging and new limits on the strength of nicotine in e-cigs. It all comes just days after the Royal College of Physicians said e-cigs should be encouraged. At this e-cig factory, there was dismay today. They fear that those using e-cigs, known as vapers, are getting mixed messages from officials and that new rules will discourage use.
There's a risk that lots of vapers will no longer find the products they need, and many smokers who would otherwise be encouraged to come to vaping will continue to smoke and not find vaping the choice for them.
Despite almost zero regulation, e-cigs have flourished, and this is an example of the kind of innovation that's been going on, but it also shows the impact of new rules.
Here they blend different nicotines to tempt tobacco users into e-cig use. In future, it won't be allowed. Leslie Stent is one of 2.6 million now using e-cigs, and she doesn't think increased regulation will slow take-up.
If people are going to buy them, they'll buy them, whether they're advertised or not. Don't honestly believe that the advertisement makes any difference.
E-cigs have altered the habits of millions, but now they themselves face change. Chris Choi, ITV News.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News.
This is insane.
Wildfires force the evacuation of 80,000 people from a city in Canada.
And the Super Gran, proving you are never too old to be a record breaker. Those stories and more after the break. Jonathan.
Welcome back. There are warnings tonight that a huge wildfire that's forced the evacuation of an entire city in Canada could get worse. More than 80,000 residents of Fort McMurray in Alberta have fled the fire, which has been burning since Sunday. Strong winds are making it extremely difficult to control, and the Army and Air Force have been called in to help. Neil Connery has the latest.
This is insane.
Fleeing for their lives from the wildfires destroying their city.
Oh, you can feel the heat. Oh my God.
Thick smoke now eclipses the skies above Fort McMurray. Strong winds and high temperatures are spreading the wildfires, which started on Sunday. 80,000 people are fleeing the flames, which have destroyed 80% of homes in one suburb. Residents forced to leave, filming the devastation.
It's a Super 8 hotel.
Overwhelmed by what they're seeing. The rush to get out, bringing gridlock to the city's main routes.
Get on the buses, please.
People grabbing what they can and taking their pets with them as they flee.
And we had basically 2 minutes to get home, grab our stuff, and we had to leave.
Nobody knows what to do. It's a terrible situation.
More than a dozen helicopters backed up by 9 air tankers are being used to drop water. The fire chief summed up the mood.
It's been the worst day of my career, and I am, the whole, the people here are devastated.
Forecasters fear with strong winds continuing, the fires will spread further in the coming hours. Neil Connery, ITV News.
Here, a team from Cambridge University has developed a new technique that could shed more light on the causes of miscarriage and infertility. But it is controversial because it involves studying human embryos at a much later stage than was previously possible. Our health editor, Rachel Younger, is here. So, Rachel, what does this all mean?
Well, if you've had a baby and pored over every stage of its development in the womb, you probably thought there was little mystery left. And that's because pictures that show the first days of an embryo's formation like this have become very familiar, because procedures like IVF mean at this stage it can happen in the lab these days rather than in the womb, so we can see exactly what's going on. But at around 7 days, it all becomes a bit more of an enigma, because until now, that's when the embryo had to be implanted into the womb in order to survive. And despite all our advances in imaging, it's just too small to really see what's going on in there. But now, scientists at Cambridge University have managed to develop the right conditions to keep an embryo in a glass dish in the lab for up to 2 weeks. And that means we can see something we've never been able to see before. These pictures, week 2, and you can see how much more complex the development process is becoming, because to their amazement, despite the lack of any input from the mother's body, research has found that the embryos kept on developing. And that means scientists can now start to better understand one of the most dangerous stages in pregnancy.
It opens for the very first time ability to understand how those structures develop. What are the key steps for our early pregnancy not to be lost? And many, as I've mentioned, unfortunately, many pregnancies are lost exactly at the time of implantation. So now we have ability to have some insight at least to this process.
Now, what this also gives researchers is scope to look at the kind of developmental defects that happen at this stage and beyond. So it's incredibly important there. But the scientists involved in this experiment had to stop what they were doing at 14 days, because that's the internationally recognised ethical limit to do that. But the very fact they've been able to reach this limit may well put pressure on for the law to be changed. And in fact, the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, independent advisor, already looking at reviewing its position, and that will be uncomfortable for some.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Rachel.
The long-awaited Chilcott inquiry will not be published until after the EU referendum, David Cameron has confirmed. The report into Britain's involvement in the Iraq War was commissioned in 2009, but its publication has been repeatedly delayed.
The UK's biggest payday lender, Wonga, saw its losses doubled last year to £80 million. It follows the introduction of stricter regulations in the industry.
And the Duchess of Cambridge has revealed a new addition to the royal household, a hamster called Marvin. Kate broke the news to school children during the opening of a new playground at Hampton Court Palace. Both Tottenham and Chelsea have been charged this evening with failing to control their players following that ill-tempered and decisive Premier League match on Monday. The Spurs midfielder Moussa Dembele has been charged with violent conduct after he appeared to gouge the eye of Chelsea's Diego Costa. If proven, he could face an extended ban.
And finally, from one end of the sporting spectrum to entirely the other, the great-great-grandmother who proves that you are never too old to set new records. Ida Keeling, who's 100, ran the 100 metres at an event in Philadelphia.
Even though it took her more than a minute, she broke the world record for her age group. And as Duncan Golestani explains, that was not the end of it.
Runner number 19 may have been slow off the starting line, but then most of Ida Keeling's competitors were decades younger. With the crowds roaring, Ida, 100 years old, set about breaking the world record for the 100-metre dash in her age group.
Well, you got athletes on the infield cheering for these folks, everyone on their feet upstairs in the stands. Ida Keeling at 100 years old. Finish line, she's across the finish.
With a record time of 1:17, Ida was not done there. She followed the race with push-ups and then stretches before revealing the secret to her success.
It's the best exercise I know for any condition. For nutrition, not for taste. Do what you need to do, not what you want to do. And make sure you exercise at least once every day.
Trained by her daughter, Ida practices in the corridors of her New York apartment block and didn't take up running until she was 67. Proof it really is never too late to start. Duncan Golestani, ITV News.
She should go for the 200 record next.
I tell you what, she puts us all to shame.
She does.
Ida Keeling, amazing woman.
That's it. Julie Etchingham, no slouch over 100 metres, will be here with news at 10.
Apart from all the team here, somewhat slower. Have a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.